Joan by Carol M Mottershead. Chapter 8. Young Polly was a breath of fresh air. She adored Nicholas and had far more energy than I to dance and sing with him and tire him out. For the first time in nearly 2 years I was able to get a good night's sleep. He took to her right away, becoming less cranky as soon as she entered his presence. At last I felt able to get on with my chores, knowing Nicholas was being cared for and happy. And oh, what a relief it was. As promised, Pulcinella did try his best to be more responsible, but it wasn't in his nature. He'd always been a joker, but his silliness became a bit more bearable now I was able to get some rest. I still liked to put Nicholas to bed though, for it was our special time together. But since Polly was now so much part of our family, I decided to add her to our stories and made her a puppet of her own. When Nicholas saw the new puppet, he loved it, right off. He named her his pretty Polly, and so she became named from then on. Headline: Queen Mary of England is dead. Long live the Queen. Only a few months later, an edict came from England that Queen Mary of England is dead. Long live the Queen. The new Queen was to be crowned on 15th of January 1559 at Westminster Abbey, London, England. Aristocrats and all people of noteworthiness were invited to attend. Although the news of her death was sad, a coronation was great news for our troop. They loved any excuse to dress in fine clothes and party. We all travelled to Calais to meet up with Father at a hostelry nearby where our ship was docked. I was so excited. There was so much to tell him about Nicholas, and we'd all be together for our wedding anniversary. I couldn't wait. I admit to being a bit surprised to see John D, till he explained he was advisor to the princess and he'd been commanded to attend her coronation. If nothing else, I thought, it would make for a pleasant crossing. Stories from John and music and dance from our troop. What a wonderful way to spend a journey to England. And we'd be in England in time for my birthday. Unfortunately, the French had other ideas. After 200 years of English rule over the port of Calais, the French decided to take back control. Their timing couldn't have been worse. The battle lasted only a few days, but it was a great battle, and many were killed. Pulcinella, Polly, baby Nicholas and I were seriously injured as we boarded our ship. John D was nearby when we fell, and I heard him call out something about a potion which he hastened to find from amongst his luggage. He was trying to say something else. I could see his lips moving, but could hear nothing over the commotion. As he passed a bottle indicating with some urgency to drink from it, I heard the word consequences, but nothing more. Saving my family was paramount. I was desperate. I took the potion from the outstretched hand of John D. His reluctance to hand it over seemed odd to me. "Don't drink too much," I finally heard him shout as he handed over the bottle. I gave some first to Nicholas, then Polly, who was laying close by, and finally Pulcinella, before taking a drink myself. Passing it back to John to give to Father, I suddenly heard Father cry out in pain. He had been hit. "No!" I heard a woman scream, a woman wearing a hooded cloak. She'd run over to Father. "An arrow!" shouted John. "Straight through his heart," called the woman. The last I saw was John running over to Father, placing an arm around the woman. Then a sudden pain. I awoke momentarily to sounds of the sea and rolling of the ship. A woman some distance away was talking animatedly to John, her face hidden by her hood. I could hear very little except that she asked him if he'd warned us not to drink too much, and she called him Nicholas. "Not sure. Too much noise," he replied. I must have lost consciousness again, because there was nothing more till I opened my eyes to see Polly standing over me, checking if I was fully awake and calling to Pulcinella and Nicholas. My first thought was for Nicholas and Pulcinella as I frantically looked around the room. They both called out together as they rushed to my cot side. Pulcinella grabbed my hands and kissed them as he usually did and pulled me to him. I looked around for Nicholas, and seeing him standing to one side, I opened my arms to him, inviting him into our circle, and hugged them both so tightly for such a long time, afraid to let them go. "Father, what about Father?" I asked, frantically looking over their shoulders, half hoping to see his familiar face, half knowing all hope to be lost. John D. appeared and told me what I already knew. The arrow had done him to death. The potion that John had given to the rest of us hadn't worked on Father. Father had been unable to swallow. John tried to tell me something important, but I was too distraught to listen. I had to see the captain. How long I had been unconscious I couldn't tell. Checking that Polly was all right to look after Nicholas a little longer, I gave Nicholas a kiss and a hug and set off to see Captain. All I could think about at that moment was sending Father's body back to be with Mother. It's what he would have wanted. Pulcinella came with me, John D. leading the way, offering to help in any way he could. But this was my duty. One last duty. I owed it to Father. The captain agreed to take Father's body safely to my home. Father's home, that is. He agreed that we pay half his fee at the outset, along with a letter to governess containing instructions to pay the balance to the captain upon safe delivery of Father, as promised. A second private letter was to be delivered to governess, for her eyes only. Private and confidential to Perinell 007. My dearest governess, or may I call you Perinell? It is strange that I have never known your name until the other night, when Father talked about you. He spoke of you with such affection. I'm glad you stayed with him after Mother died. He would have been lonely otherwise, especially after Pulcinella and I were married. Thank you for that. It is with a deep heart that I have to send Father back to you in this manner. My heart is breaking not to be able to bring him home myself, but my duties now lie with my husband and son. I hope you understand. I will miss you dearly. You have always been there for me, but I fear we may never see each other again. Other than you, my father was all I had left to keep me tied to my family home. Please take good care of it for as long as you can. It is your home for as long as you desire. I ask but one thing of you, my dear Perinell. It seems strange calling you by your given name, but Father would have wanted to be laid to rest with Mother. I entrust his body to your care, in full knowledge that you will do what needs to be done. He cared for you. He said as much when he spoke your name. I enclose a letter of authorization to be shown to the bankers, instructing them to provide you with a bursary to cover your living expenses, and a fee for your services to the house. My love will be with you always. I hope we will meet again one day. Love and affection always, yours most sincerely, Joan. The captain promised to do my bidding. My last and final duty to Father complete, I returned to our cabin. Baby Nicholas had to be my priority now, my husband and my son. There was no time to weep. There was a coronation to prepare for. Nicholas, a little over 2 years of age, seemed to sense I was upset about something and kept giving me hugs, wanting to be close to me, and for once Pulcinella kept his usual joviality to a zero. We would be landing in England the next morning. We needed to rest, with Pulcinella cuddling me and Nicholas snuggled into me. They were my only family now. I was an orphan. Why was I feeling so alone, with my own family so close? Quietly, I cried myself to sleep. The next day, Pulcinella arranged for the rest of the troop to go on ahead of us and set up camp nearer London. We'd meet them in a day or two. John Dee, true to his word, took us to see his good friend, Mr. Nicholas Hopper, a local scrivener in Tunbridge, the next day. He agreed to handle all the legalities for father's estate. Physically and emotionally drained, Pulcinella insisted we stay the night at the Chequers Inn and set off bright and early the next day. We only had a few days to prepare for the coronation, and much would still be needed to be done. Coronation Day. When Coronation Day finally arrived, there was an unprecedented atmosphere of excitement. As hoped, the celebrations made for good pickings. Everyone was in a joyous mood, drinking, dancing and making merry, and readily parting with their money. A great day for our troop. By evening, most of the public celebrations were over. It was time for us to party. After much drinking and carousing, it was during one of the dances that Pulcinella accidentally grabbed Polly and kissed her. She slapped his face in disgust, and despite Pulcinella trying profusely to apologise for his mistake, insisting he'd believed he'd grabbed me instead, Polly would have none of it. She was outraged, and if truth be told, a little worse for wear herself. She left the celebrations to check on Nicholas, she claimed. Everyone rose late the next day. Polly was still embarrassed over the events of the night before, and told us she would be returning home as soon as travel could be arranged. We later discovered, before she left, that she had received word from her parents that she was to marry a noble personage from Norfolk. She'd been upset all day, bless her, but didn't want to spoil the celebrations by mentioning it to anyone, especially Nicholas. Nicholas had developed quite an attachment to his pretty Polly. He'd grown to love her, and he was devastated by the news. He clung to her every chance he got. When she left, we kept her in our puppet shows, and he'd talk to her, kiss her good night, and hug her till he fell asleep. Keeping her memory alive in the puppet shows seemed to help. She was such a lovely girl. We all missed her. Pulcinella and I wanted to remain in England for a while after the coronation, and the troop agreed. Apparently, they'd heard quite a few stories from John Dee during the crossing, about how beautiful England could be in the spring, about the strange and varied dialects across the land. He'd even mimicked some of them to enhance his storytelling. I wish I'd been able to hear him talking. He sounded fascinating. Which reminded me, there was one thing I needed to do before leaving London. I needed to see John Dee once more. I had questions I needed answering. Who was the woman who rushed to father's side when he was shot? Who was the woman he spoke with in the shadows, and what was the warning she spoke of? Why did she call him Nicholas? I had to speak with John Dee. I remembered he'd said he was an advisor to the Queen, and would be staying at Windsor Castle temporarily until he could find lodgings of his own. So that was where I had to start to find him. There was a lot of work still to be done before I could take time out to see John. A new township normally involved travelling long distances, setting up camp, gathering charters and notices for me to translate, writing a new play, costumes to make if necessary, and rehearsals. Even improvisations need to have a basic play to work from. Surprisingly, Pulcinella acted responsibly and took charge of the situation. He arranged for someone to look after Nicholas, and to save time he arranged for someone to gather in the posters that I would need when we rejoined them. I was able to write a letter to John D, just in case we couldn't get to physically see him. My instinct proved useful, for when we arrived at Windsor Castle, it was still heavily guarded, with a number of aristocrats still within. Pulcinella tried introducing me to the guards as Dame Joan to see John D, hoping that the title would gain us access to the castle, but we were denied entry. Even telling the guards we were friends and needed to speak to him urgently was unsuccessful. He is with Her Majesty and cannot be disturbed, we were informed. Having anticipated this moment, I produced the letter I had written and passed it to the Pulcinella to pass to the guard. For the attention of John D. 007. My dearest John D, it's Joan. My father is Nicholas. You helped me arrange for his body to be returned to our home. You gave my family and I a potion, and mentioned there are consequences. I need to speak with you urgently. Please, I beg you, grant us an audience before we leave London tomorrow. You are my father's friend, and I hope you will be mine also. In anticipation, sincerely yours, Dame Joan Pulcinella. I anxiously looked on till the guard was out of sight. All we could do now was wait and hope that the guard would deliver my letter directly to John. The emotion of the past few days was starting to tell on me. Coping with the death of father and almost losing the rest of my family. Talking with the scrivener and, well, everything. I was exhausted. Pulcinella took us home to our caravan, where he suggested I try to rest. I needed it, but I couldn't. He tried encouraging me to eat, but I could only stomach drinking water. Pulcinella tried teasing me to cheer me up by asking me if I was with child again. I'd become used to his playful ways, so teasing back I said, I don't think so. You've not been keeping up with your duties of late, and smiled mischievously. Well, come here, wife, he smiled cheekily. Not in front of the baby, I was about to say, then realised he wasn't with us. I smiled and held out my hands instead. Pulcinella beamed and took my hands and kissed them. It had been so long since I'd felt his manliness and needed his comfort, his closeness. We made love, and afterwards fell into a long, comforting sleep. The next morning Pulcinella went to get fresh water and provisions for breakfast. A messenger arrived early, carrying a scroll with the words, "For the attention of Dame Joan, for your eyes only." The messenger didn't hang around for a reply, leaving as quickly as he had arrived, post-haste. Breaking the seal on the letter, I read, My dearest Joan, it is not safe for us to meet up at the moment. Eyes are watching me all the time. I have secured a box with the scrivener at Tunbridge. It is to be opened only in an emergency. It is the remainder of the potion given to you at Calais. It is a healing potion and elixir. Use it carefully. Use it wisely, for it has special side effects that you may not, as yet, be aware of. In the box there are further instructions on its correct use. Please memorize this address, Mr. N. Hopper, Tunbridge, Kent. Then destroy this note. The potion is a secret formula, and there are people who would kill for it, and I want you to be safe, my child. You must tell no one about the potion. It is for your use only, and even then, only if you need it. Be safe. Be happy, my child. I hope one day we shall meet again. Your sincere friend forever, John D. We may be in danger. Why? What was so special about a potion that heals? Now I have more questions than ever. Who is this man really? What are these side effects he spoke of? Suddenly, afraid for my family, I did as I was told. I memorized the address and burned the note in the fire that I'd prepared for cooking breakfast when Pulcinella returned. I wanted dearly to share this news with Pulcinella, but John had said to tell no one. Surely I could trust my husband.